For those of you that, since this is recorded and will be shared for other people, it'll be in our library. If you don't want to be on the screen, just turn your video off, just have your own privacy that way. Also wanted to start, I wanted to thank everybody for showing up to our community conversation for the month of May. I'm excited to have Adrienne Miller here talk. But first I wanted to declare this as a safe space. We all come from different backgrounds, but we try to respect everybody's opinions, and we'd like to just keep it that way. Also want to do a land acknowledgement of the taken lands from the Native American people of where I'm in the Edmonds area, and wherever you guys are, just pay respect to their past, present, and future leaders and members, um, for all the wonderful things they've done. We usually start these with a little kind of COVID update. What I was going to start with is that the CDC basically started or changed their recommendations to now it's exactly like every other infectious thing where if you have a fever after 24 hours, you are able to be back in public unmasked, and you're able to go back to work. That is their guidance right now. I think we're hopefully getting to the end of this, that we will be able to stop talking about COVID. One thing that I would say is getting us close to that is that the latest two strains that are out there, the scientific community has now had to come up with a cute nickname for them, which is now Flirt. Uh, it basically says, I think we're getting to the end of this. So I think this might be one of the last times we talk about COVID. One thing I would always like to stress with these things is childhood vaccines, given the outbreaks of measles and all the other things, is something that I highly recommend for everybody. Just make sure that that is something. But other than that, there's nothing really new going on at this point in time. So I'd like to hand it over to Adrienne Miller, who will be talking to us today, and I'll let you take the show. And one last thing before I let Adrienne start is if you could put your questions into the chat, we will start with that. And also, if any other senior housing advisors that just do specifically that have any comments or things, please just raise your hand, and we'll probably allow Adrienne to kind of add to, or please add to Adrienne's thing as thing, but we also want to just keep this as a decorum too. So, okay, so I will hand it over to Adrienne then.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I am the first one to say that I don't know everything. In fact, most of you all probably know much more than I do in this vein. And those that are senior housing advisors, we all come from different backgrounds, and there are several people that I know are members of this group that have done this for far longer than I have. And so appreciate their input and their insights as we all kind of run different areas of this business in different ways. So please jump in if you have things that you'd like to share. I started my business 7 years ago, and I'd like to start with what I call my Aunt Alice story. My Aunt Alice story is that my 90-year-old Aunt Alice fell, broke a hip, and ended up in a rehab, and 4 months later decided she could go back home. Very cantankerous, tough old lady. And she said, I'm going back home. So she wheeled herself around in her wheelchair. She was ambulatory, but she didn't want to fall down again. So she just did her own thing. She had some friends down in Federal Way. I live up in the North End. So she was down there, and she did fine with help from friends. A woman who came in to help do some housekeeping came in one day, and she was slurring her words. She wasn't making any sense. They thought she'd had a stroke and rushed her off to St. Joseph's, and come to find she had a UTI. Well, at that time, I didn't know UTIs could do that to the elderly. A whole new world for me. I was in hotel sales, group sales. And so I go rushing down to St. Joseph's thinking, oh boy, this is the end of Aunt Alice. And I'm calling my mother, and I get there and they said, oh, she has a UTI. I said, great, pump her full of antibiotics and we'll take her home. And the doctor, few probing questions, said, well, where does she live and who cares for her? And oh, she cares for herself. You know, wouldn't have it any other way. And he said, she's not a safe release. I cannot release her to home. And my first question was, can you do that? And his answer was, I'm supposed to do that. So it set in motion. The next few weeks, she was discharged to a skilled nursing. That was lesson number 2. She was admitted under observation instead of as an inpatient. So she, although she was in the hospital for 3 days, she did not have a 3-day qualifying stay for Medicare. She paid 100% in a skilled nursing for about 3 weeks as I set to work finding a place for her. I didn't know anything about, I had 2 friends who owned adult family homes, my only connection to the industry. And I set to work and finally found a home, got her settled. She basically hated it for the rest of her days, but she was well cared for another 1.5 years. But about 2 weeks later, I woke up not really wanting to get out of bed. And if you know those mornings where you lay there a little extra while thinking about the day instead of fully embracing it, that was one of those mornings. And I finally had what I like to say, I knew the word epiphany, but I'd never had one. And that morning I had one. And I knew that what I had just done for my aunt was what I was supposed to be doing, and set about figuring out how to make that happen. In that moment, I knew the name of my company, which is Forever Care Services. And I got up and went to the computer and first Googled, how do you start a business? Because I didn't know that. And then went from there. The domain was available and I knew how to do that because I watched the Super Bowl, and GoDaddy can give you websites. So went there, found the website, it was available, bought it, called my husband, went to work, and he said, I left an hour ago. What happened? So that's how I started my business 7 years ago, and I never looked back. I absolutely adore what I do, and I love helping with families. I can't believe that I didn't figure this out sooner. So there's Aunt Alice's story. I thank my Aunt Alice every day for getting me into this business. Um, so how many folks have worked with a senior housing advisor, bringing them in to work with your clients in this group? I can't see everybody, but if you have, and then are there some that have not, that this is kind of a new thing? Okay, great. So what is a senior housing advisor? I think each of us has our own definition. You sometimes hear referral agent. You sometimes hear placement agent. I don't think anybody wants to be placed unless you're a vase of roses on a table. So try and stay away from placement, but it's kind of part of the lexicon in the industry. I think senior housing advisor is really what I do. And my, one floor elevator speech is that I try and reduce the overwhelming options in senior housing and care to what actually fits the person I'm working with based on some required criteria. And that required criteria, many people within the industry don't know that we as senior housing advisors actually have our own law here in Washington that we have to follow. And I have to read it off because it's a long name. It's RCW 18.330, which you can look up if you want to. It's only 9 pages long, so it's not as long as some of the other laws on the books. But it is the Elder and Vulnerable Adult Referral Agency Act. It actually falls under the AG's office. It's under consumer protection. And it is different. It sounds similar, but it's different than RCW 74.34, which is the Vulnerable Adult Protection Act. So they sound alike, but one is strictly for those of us that refer for housing. And within that law, when I start working with a family, I really like to start with a 40,000-foot quick look at what this law says, because I think that's important for families to understand that this is not only a bona fide business, but one that somebody's watching over. For those that were here back in 2012, 2010, the Seattle Times did a big expose, multi-page expose on the senior housing industry. I think one of the headlines was Seniors for Sale. It was an awful, awful time. And the legislature got involved and said, we need to put some bumpers on this. We need to have some control here. And we need these people to realize that we are working with human beings and vulnerable human beings at that. So there are some things that I share rather than sharing all 9 pages. I'll send it to anybody who wants it. But I think the high level information that families need to know are that I have to send out a disclosure of my services. And the disclosure is an outline of what that law says, what I can do and what I can't do under the law. I even have to include contact information for the AG's office in case someone wants to call and find out more either about the industry or, well, God forbid, report me. Nobody's ever called. I'm doing well, but it's in there for a reason. There's 2 signature lines. One is an acknowledgement that the family received the information that I'm required to send. The second signature is a health information release. It's not technically HIPAA. It is similar to HIPAA, but the information that I gather about the care needs and medical needs of my client, I'm then allowed to share with prospective communities. So that's one part of the law I think is important. Another part is the intake. And the intake is 13 outlined in the law, 13 specific questions that we have to ask from everything from care needs, recent medical diagnoses, dementia mental health diagnoses, medication management needs, activity preferences, sleep habits, geographic preference, a little bit about the finances. I'll go into that in a minute, but it gives me a good picture of what this person is needing. And a part of that is, in a way, it's kind of a triage for what I'm doing, which can play into what the title of today's conversation was, which is where do we start respite or a permanent move to an adult family home? I would add to that, it helps me understand or at least make suggestions on whether a given person might be a better suited to a larger community, like a assisted living building with all the activities and things that goes with that, or a smaller adult family home with only 6 residents in a residential setting. So that intake is really that roadmap for me to be able to specifically steer toward 2 or 3 or 4 options to share with the family, that all of which, if I've done my job correctly, technically fit, but then the family or the senior, if they're still able to participate, are able to say, on paper, all these things fit. This is the one that fits me. So those are, I think, really the key things in the law. A lot of times people will, one of the first questions is, how do you get paid? We are paid a referral fee from the communities that we refer to, as long as the resident is not on Medicaid. The state does not allow for a referral fee to be paid from a community that's accepting dollars to care for a person. Now, we can have a contract with a family where monies that are not part of the senior's money, say a family member wants to pay me an hourly rate to go do this for their Medicaid family member, that's legal. But the community cannot pay a referral fee. So those folks, there are groups out there that Providence Elder Place, Homage, some of these others that can work with those folks, or, when given time, all of us in the industry will do that as well. Pro bono, if there's, not an hourly rate to be had, we do that all the time. But legally, we cannot work with a Medicaid referral to get a fee from a community. So then people say, well, aren't you then steering people to the communities that will pay you the most? No. Maybe somebody out there is doing that and they should get out of the industry. But the rest of us, because of that intake, that triage that we're doing, we then are headed to where this is the best fit for the person. And back to that law, the law says I can't have an exclusive contract with anyone, any company. I cannot require my clients to sign an exclusive agreement to only use my services. And I cannot have an exclusive contract with any community. My referral agreements are just that, but it is not a contract of any kind. The family signs the disclosure acknowledging and giving me permission, but they are free to work with whoever they want. And the communities, I have an agreement that if I introduce them to a family member moves in and decides that that is going to be where they're going to live, then the community pays a referral fee to me. So is there opportunity for bad faith players? Absolutely. Are there people that might be in collusion? Possibly, probably. But hopefully they get weeded out pretty quickly, because this isn't, I came out of the hotel industry. This is not a heads and beds industry. We're not just trying to fill a hotel. We're finding the right fit for the person that we're working with and their family. So it's all about both. My job is to show families, the community, the family has to be able to walk away knowing that their person is going to be well cared for, and they can go back to being a family member and no longer a caregiver oftentimes. So kind of back to, I guess, any questions at that point? I think that's kind of a good point. Were there any questions that came in or any other advisors that wanted to add to that?
There are a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah, the only question in the chat is there a word that you would use instead of using the word placed? I think some people might find that word.
Yeah, yeah, that's why, we don't want to be a placement agency. I think referred to, I help people find communities. I help a successful search for the proper community. But yeah, we're not, this isn't furniture. So placed is not the right word. It's often used, but I don't think it's the right word. Just like we don't want to say facilities. Nobody wants to live in a facility. We want to live in communities, whether they're large or small. We want to live, in communities and residential or larger buildings. But often facilities are still used. And I think a part of that is skilled nursing SNFs or skilled nursing facilities, and it just kind of goes across the board, but we try and use the word community instead.
And another question that's come up is there a period of time that the elder has to live in the facility before the senior advisor receives their referral fee?
So technically, if somebody lives in a community less than 30 days, either moves out or passes away, we have to prorate our fee for that amount of time. Most of the communities, the larger communities, typically don't pay till 30 or 45 days so that there isn't a refund issue needed to be had. But the law does state that anything less than 30 days, it has to be prorated for that amount of time. Each advisor can select their payment outline, how they invoice. For me, I send a single invoice to the larger buildings that's due 45 days out. For the smaller communities, I break it into thirds for the adult family homes. So a third of a payment comes out each month for the first 3 months to spread it out a little further, just because they're only caring for 6 people in a small home. And I think that's a more fair way to do that.
And then one other quick question is, do you include the health needs assessment and financial assessments to the residents to make sure that they have the appropriate services? And I assume the law covers that you have to give the health needs to the place to understand what that, what their health needs are to make sure it's a good fit. And
Okay, I understand. So with my intake, I then start calling. And whether it's a larger building, smaller building, I call and take that intake. Information is as good as what I've received. But if I get a good outline of, recent surgeries, medical needs, med management, dementias, cognitive issues, all of that, I share that initially with communities before I would ever set up a tour, so that we're at least, let's say someone is a insulin dependent diabetic and a community doesn't do that unless they can self-administer. Then that building, obviously, I'm not going to take someone to that building. 2-person transfers. Some of the buildings can handle a 2-person transfer if somebody ages in place, but they don't expect to accept a 2-person transfer from day one. So with the intake, I narrow down to the communities that say at least on paper that they can care for this person, doing tours. And then the assessments that are done are done in 2 different ways, depending on the community. The standalone memory care and assisted living buildings have their nursing director or their nurse do an assessment that it will say, A, whether they can care for this person, and then B, what the cost of that will be in care levels or care points. In an adult family home, we have a nurse or a social worker. There's a list of folks that are authorized by the state to do assessments for adult family homes. And that person will do an assessment. It's about 25-page, 26-page assessment. It's in 2 parts. The first is what are the actual details and care needs of this person, background, medical history, meds, dementia, all of that. The second half is specific to each of the activities of daily living and other points, what caregivers would need to do for that person. So it's a pretty involved assessment. I can send that to any adult family home. It's valid for 30 days once it's done. And then that adult family home can look at it and say, based on this criteria, we can accept this person or not, and at what rate.
And the second part of that was also a financial assessment. Is that something that's...
So financial is a little tricky because we are not required to delve into anyone's personal finances. So this is, we ask the question, and typically I ask it in a way that I hope is not seeming to be prying too much. Communities either accept Medicaid or they don't. And then if they accept Medicaid, they accept it from day one, which is very, very few, or they do what is called a spend down to Medicaid. What that means is you pay market rate for a certain period of time. And then if you're eligible for Medicaid, can convert to Medicaid and stay in that same community with Medicaid and the state paying for your housing and care. With that, it's typically, most of the adult family homes are 2 to 3 years. There are a handful of the larger buildings that are 2 to 4 years. But if, so one of the way I couch my question is, do you have resources that will outlive you? Do you expect to have resources that will last longer than you do? Got to word it in a way that sounds better than that. But in essence, if somebody says, I probably am going to run out of funds before I pass, then we only look at buildings that will offer a spend down to Medicaid if that person never wants to move again. Every once in a while, you get someone who says, I'm fairly young. I know my finances aren't going to last, but they're going to last 5 years. And I'm 77 and I'm probably going to live till 90 based on my family history. But I want to live in the place I want to live and enjoy every bit of it while I can. So they'll move there for 3 years and then move to a community that offers a 2-year spend down for the last 2 years so they can be eligible for Medicaid. So there's a few different ways of working, it's not working the system, but being smart about where you're living so that you can stay in place.
Okay.
Is there
Well,
anything else?
there's one more question, but I think we can wait just a little bit and let you kind of discuss more about what the differences are and go on with your talk. So
okay. So where this kind of started is a couple months ago, we had a wonderful speaker talking about subacute and acute skilled nursing and moves from hospitals. And the thing that I've found while doing my business is there is, not always, generalization, this idea that if you fall and break a hip or you have some sort of surgery as an elderly person, there's this track that is go to the hospital, stay a few days, get discharged to skilled nursing, stay there as long as Medicare will let you or until you've done your rehab, and then make a decision on whether you can go home or if you have to find another place to live. And I have found that a lot of my elderly clients, although the hospital is saying we can refer you to skilled nursing, the idea of rehab is that I think I wrote it down. Typically, acute rehab is appropriate for those who require and are able to actively participate in, and those are the key words, actively participate in 3 hours of therapy per day, PT/OT, speech therapy, 5 to 7 days per week. There are a lot of elderly people that they will benefit greatly from PT and OT, but not on that schedule. And since Medicare is looking, at that care conference every week determining progress, I found that some of my clients do better going directly from hospital discharge to an adult family home, or even an assisted living with a high level of nursing care with PT/OT coming in, because they can still do it every day, but maybe they can do it for 30 minutes a day, not 3 hours a day. And having caregivers that can, if PT for home health is coming in once a week or twice a week, the caregivers in an adult family home can work with that person every single day. It's just not at that higher level schedule. And so oftentimes I'm talking to families and they're saying, well, the discharge planner or the social worker saying we should go to skilled nursing. And it's almost like this is what you do next. And this isn't a one size fits all industry. We all know that with our clients. And so I just wanted to interject that sometimes that skilled nursing piece is not appropriate for everyone. And there are reasons financially, if you have that 3-day qualifying stay. Some people, I had a recent client who said, I don't know if my mom's going to be able to participate or not, but now is the time to try it because she had the 3-day qualifying stay. Medicare will pay for up to that first 20 days at 100%, and we're going to give it a try. And that was that family's decision. I had another family that just moved directly from hospital to adult family home, because although the hospital said, let's go to skilled nursing, this gentleman was bad knees, arthritic knees, edema, heart failure, 94 years old. And he was, in his family's opinion and my questioning, he really was not going to get much out of that skilled nursing stay. It was just one more move. So we found a lovely adult family home where PT and OT is going to come into him. He's getting great food in a light, bright room. He was actually involved when one of the state parks was created in Washington, and we found a house on the road to that state park. So he's looking out the window at everybody going down to the park he helped create. So he's really happy, his family's really happy, and he's in a space where he can improve at a speed that is actually something doable for him. There are some families that come into this and, you know, we've all seen it, it's deer in headlights. No, people all the time say, I didn't know I was supposed to know this. Well, nobody's supposed to know this. If you have family members that never need to get near rehab, skilled nursing, assisted living, this isn't curriculum in high school or college. This is something that you don't need to know it until you need to know it. And then you should have some professionals in your corner, because you don't need to be an expert on it. You just need to find an expert. And all of you who do what you do for your clients, we all have Rolodexes. I'll date myself. You know, I go spinning through mine for care managers and home care and home health and transportation companies and PT and all these things. And so I get 6 calls a day. They don't need me yet. They may never need me, but I'm the first one somehow they found. And so making sure that we can be that resource to everyone. But sometimes people will call and say, I don't even know where to start. Well, that's why you call. So that, you know, that's why we can do this a little at a time. So people say, how do you know whether to go to an assisted living or an adult family home? Where's the tipping point? Where's one of the big ones is impulse control due to cognitive decline and fall risk. When those two things go together, my inclination, another advisor might be totally different. My inclination is adult family home. An adult family home is a residence, up to 6 residents, typically in shared or private rooms, 2 caregivers. In most houses, you can't get more than 40, 50 feet away from somebody in a room in that place. If you've got the bed pad alarm, you've got a motion sensor. If they're not able to use a call bell, you can still have ways that by the time they start moving, someone's there. So them trying to stand up because cognitively they don't know that they shouldn't and they're a fall risk, someone's right there. In the larger buildings, including memory care that can provide excellent care, the staffing is different. They provide excellent care. But if you've got somebody who's going to stand up and fall down before anybody can get there, in my mind, I probably would refer families more to an adult family home. But then it's up to them. If we walk in and they say, oh, no, this is too small, there's not enough to do, this just isn't mom, then okay, let's pivot. Let's go look at some different things. So I don't make recommendations. In fact, the law somewhere in there says that we really can't. We refer you to communities based on our best information. And that intake is where a lot of that comes from. But then we need input from the families. If mom has advanced dementia, but is still super social and loves playing bingo, even if she can't really play bingo anymore, but she likes sitting in and watching the movies at night that they play in the bigger buildings, even if she's not really following the storyline. The isolation of being in an adult family home might be such that that's not the right fit. So then you figure out the fall risk piece. And you're navigating it with the family. Families are the ones who make the decisions. I just show them what's out there, and I do it based on the information that I gather from them and the information that I have from all of the communities out there, and information from all of you. You work closely with your families, and if you come to me and say, I've been working with this person for the last 3 years, and she is going to be best suited in this type of community, let's go look for this. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, based on what I know, we're going to go this way. No, I take the information from the experts, and whether that's you, whether it's family members, or whether that's the senior themselves, that's where we get started. And then we work together to walk down that road to find the best fit.
So there's a
Yes.
question here. In terms of assisted living communities, do you mean the board and care facility, or do you mean that's just one of the questions here? And they were wondering, how does that work with a youngish or younger person, like with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, versus an older person?
Great question. The board and care, it sounds like that whoever asked that might be out of Washington State. We all have different names for what we call things. Here in Washington, assisted living community, memory care community are the larger buildings that provide an apartment, meals, transportation to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping activities within the community, and then care services on a schedule. So they would come in, do an assessment. Someone needs help with bathing, dressing, transferring, that would come in on a scheduled basis. So if that's what you mean by board and care, that's one of the types of buildings. Our residential homes are here in Washington are called adult family homes. I think in other states, they might be group homes, boarding homes, other names. In Washington, we're licensed for a maximum of 8 if the building is big enough. Up until just a few years ago, it was a maximum of 6 residents in a residential home. The second part of the question, younger folks. Those are tougher to find placements for in some ways. It depends on the level of care needed and kind of where they are in that journey. Many of the communities in this area are either require a age of 62 plus or a 65 plus. There are a couple that are 55 plus. The adult family homes can set their own, there really is no age restriction. They can choose who their residents are. The adult family homes have to have education for one of or all of 3 things: mental health training, dementia training, and developmental disability training. They can have all 3. As long as they have that in the primary diagnosis of the person moving in, they have that check mark, they have that training of their caregivers, they can accept those folks. So someone who is younger, has advanced care needs, is a bit more of a challenge. Some of the larger buildings in this area can provide care for Parkinson's, ALS. I have not had a client with ALS. If there's anybody else who's a senior advisor here that can jump in on that, I would love to hear that. But many of the communities can care for younger people, and it's an exception to the rule because of the care needs. Or sometimes if you can't find a community, unfortunately, they'll end up in an adult family home, often with elderly folks, some of whom may have dementia. So socially, it's not the best fit, but the care piece is there, but maybe the psychosocial isn't as good.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
No, I think that's everything. Everybody's just talking about what it is in their state right now. So I'll let you continue.
All right. So the other piece that is important, part of the law here in Washington, our Department of Social and Health Services is the one that oversees our care communities. And they go in, it's supposed to be about once a year. With COVID, everything is really far behind on the inspections of the state surveys. But we have a website that we can go to, and we can look up the adult family homes, the assisted living, and the skilled nursing facilities, and look at the latest reports. And we are required to do so and report what we see to our clients. Right now, a lot of the homes have not been inspected in years. A lot of the communities, the last inspection might have been 2020, 2021. So our hands are a little tied, but any community here in Washington is required to show you their latest inspection, whether it was a couple of years ago or a couple of days ago. So you can walk in and always ask for that report to see what the latest is. even if it's not posted, the website now is down to either nothing, it'll say no reports, which there are reports back there somewhere, but maybe they're too old. And if they're older than a couple of years old, they're not there. But anything that I find, I have to report to the family, and I can just send a link. Every once in a while, you find a community, it just says, we inspected on this date and found no deficiencies. You think, hallelujah, I don't know how you did it, but good for you. And those are the gems of communities for families, because they got everything right. Really, really, really difficult to do. But the way our state works, they'll go in, if they're cited for something, they have a certain amount of time to fix it. The state goes back in, and then we'll send another letter that's posted that says, you've corrected all the deficiencies and you're in compliance. Personally, what I do with that information is I take a look, and I'm looking for major care issues. I'm looking for medication management issues. I'm looking for safety issues. And if their fire extinguisher was 2 weeks out of date, get a new one. Pay attention to the details. But that's not as egregious to me as mixing up meds or forgetting meds, not ordering meds. Because a lot of times, the communities then are in charge of ordering the meds. And if they don't have it on hand, or they've run out, or their dosage has changed and they haven't updated that, that's dangerous. So I look for those things. Sometimes I'll pull something up and there's 42 pages of citations. I pretty much just close it and move on. That doesn't seem to make sense for me to take someone to a place, even if they've corrected them all. My issue with that many is, even if the next report says, all clear, how did you get 42 pages in the first place? And the other day I did this. I called a community and said, okay, here in Washington, if you have a citation, you have a certain amount of time to fix it. If it's not fixed, and I'm not clear on how many times, the state finally will say, all right, already, we're fining you. You haven't gotten this fixed. It's a repeated offense from here and here. We're fining you. And the fines are $300,000, $400,000. When you get to fines, that means it's multiple times that somebody wasn't minding the store. Somebody is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But with some communities, especially the larger assisted livings, you have a revolving door sometimes of executive directors. You have changes of personnel. COVID upset the boat. And then some of those buildings are actually not locally owned. They're part part of a local group. They're part of some nationwide thing that's now part of a real estate investment trust. This is a Wall Street vehicle that they're looking at the bottom line. And sometimes when it comes down to our street, not Wall Street, it really messes things up. So giving those communities the benefit of the doubt and sitting down with the executive director and saying, what happened? Why were there so many things that you got cited for? And I had a family one time who the building was perfect. It was the perfect location. This was a woman who was stuck between teenage and college age kids and her mom, and she was a school teacher, and she needed that building. That was the one spot that was going to really work. They had a lot of issues. And so we sat down. I said, read through it. Here's 42 pages. Read it. You tell me what's most important, and we will get a meeting with that executive director. And we sat down, and she brought up every highlighted thing. And the executive director owned up to some, said that was kind of a misunderstanding. This was a change of, staff, and went through it. And the woman said, all right, I'm confident now. And she moved her mom in, and she's been there for 5 years, and it's been fine. So this is a conversation. This is something that I am not be all end all. I get to be the gatekeeper. But if there's a community that you say, my client knows someone in this building, they're really happy there, and I look at it and there's those 42 pages, well, maybe that was an anomaly. Maybe that was a point in time where something was going on. So let's have that conversation. Or if it's really, really bad stuff, I'm going to move on.
Well, transparency is always best. The fact that the executive comes back and explains to things, and if it passes muster from the 5-minute test of understanding what they're saying, and if it's not just something that they're trying to be the salesperson, I think you could easily move on and that stuff. Yeah, so I'll let you continue.
Trying to think what else is really important in this. So my process, I would do that intake. I would look at the DSHS reports. I then send some ideas to the family I make calls to the community to find out if they have availability and what basic pricing is. Never asking about care because that's based on the assessment. I'm not a nurse, but basic in the larger buildings, they have for a 1-bedroom, it's X a month. That includes your rent, utilities, food, everything. In an adult family home, they typically have a beginning price. And so I'll report that back to the family, attach a website if there is a website. Many of the adult family homes are lovely, lovely people who provide excellent care. They don't have websites. It makes it a little tougher, but I will send the information I can find. And then what we'll do is decide where they want to tour. There are lots of different versions of senior housing advisors across the country. In my mind, and this is my way of doing things, and I tend to think it's the right way to do things, is really hand-holding families all the way through this. There are some out there that are more of appointment setters. They'll listen to what you need, and then they'll call buildings and say, go here, here, and here, and report back. If that works for you, great. Most of my families need a lot more hand-holding than that. And so I will send off the information. People will tell me where they want to tour. I set the tour and then I tour with them, because all of the information that I take on an intake, all of the paper that I have on my side doesn't hold a candle to walking in the door and having somebody say, wow, this is so much brighter than I thought it would be. Or, wow, there's nobody here. Is there nobody living in the building? Mom would feel like it's kind of a, hello, hello, hello. So being there makes all the difference. The other thing that I can provide on that tour is the marketing manager knows her building, and you know your family member. I'm the one in the middle that knows a little bit about both. So sometimes when we're walking through, I'll know a tidbit about a family member or a client that I can say to the marketing manager, hey, don't you have a pool? Because they may not always show the pool looking at somebody who's maybe, doesn't look like they use a pool. Everybody has an idea. And they'll say, yeah, we do. And they'll say, oh, mom was a long distance swimmer. And even though she's in a wheelchair, she loves getting in a pool. Oh, so, I help navigate that. It's a combination of matchmaker, tour guide. We have lots of different hats that we wear. So it is a walkthrough. And I try and not walk people through more than 3, maybe 4. I will show you as many as you want to see. That's my job. But they all start blending together. They all start looking alike. It starts getting confusing as to, was the one on Tuesday the one that had this, or was that the one on Thursday? Kind of back to what I said before. If I've done my job correctly, if I've asked the right questions and more particularly listened to what the needs are and the wants are, anything that we walk through should be a fit on paper. And then we've got to find the one that's really the fit in your gut. Where is, both mom going to be well cared for, and I can walk away after saying hello, go on vacation and not worry. And that's really what we're looking for. So after we go through the walkthrough, the tour, somebody decides where to go. I typically step back. I'm not involved. I will look through a contract. I'm not an attorney. If you really want a contract looked at, send it to your attorney. But do you want me to look at it and say, there's nothing in here that jumps out as out of the ordinary? I'm happy to do that. And then once a contract is signed, move dates, all of that, people move in, and I, get to send flowers and say, check in a week or 2 later. And really then it's between the community and the family. So my job is to make that introduction, be available to assist in any way, and then step back so I'm not in the way of progress if I'm out of the office all day touring with another client and they're waiting on an answer from me. So I step back, but I'm available whenever somebody needs me.
Well, that's great.
I would love to add, Adrienne, that you also wear the hat of counselor, because you worked with a family member of my husband's, and the family was not in agreement. And I did not want to be in that role, but you really managed that well. And I would just add that to your hats that you wear.
Thank you.
Sort of a family counselor.
Thank you.
One question that Melina Owen asked is, do you have any experience with respite care, home care for pediatrics or young adults?
I don't. The homes that I work with are all, well, I'll back that up. In my job, in my practice, as it were, no. I actually have a very good friend who owns a company where she works with babies and kids on trachs, high risk. So I could make that referral if it was that level of care that was needed. But other than that, no, I don't.
And then there was another question that what do you do about when people are in residential communities that they are paying for services that they don't need? Is there anything that you but the nurse that's on site is saying that they do need it? Is there anything that can be done about that, or that? Or, I mean, that seems to be a little bit outside of what that's more of after you've handed off to them.
It
or to
is, however, here in Washington, and again, for those out of the state, you probably have something similar. Here in Washington, we call it a negotiated care plan. When you move into a community, whether it's a larger building or an adult family home, you have a negotiated care plan. And I think negotiated, that word is important. It is something that the community is supposed to sit down with the family or with the senior, if they're able to, make their own decisions, and say, this is what we see the care is. And you can look at it and say, okay, you did the assessment on a day where mom just came out of the hospital, was fairly weak, might have been a 2-person transfer, and she's no longer that. She's 1 person, or even just standby assist. This needs to be adjusted. Most communities that I know will say, okay, we'll look at that. They may not click the switch that day, but they'll take a look at it. If you find that they won't at all, there are some communities that say, in our community, this is our standard. We require points, dollars for this as a basic. There's one community that brings everybody in at a stage 0 care. And the reason they do that is so that everybody's already on their books for the day that they do need care, and they can provide assistance if an emergency happens. They charge $400 day 1, whether you need care or not. So if you dispute that, you're not going to get them to take it away, because that's their baseline. So then it might be you want to look for another community. But in general, I think having conversations, and if the nurse is saying you need it and you can't get her to take it off, I would go to the executive director and say, can we have a meeting about this? Because we're really seeing that this is something that mom or dad is not needing, is not accessing, and we're being charged for it. And having that conversation with the executive director at that point.
Okay. And then we have a question from Margaret. What do you use to keep current on specific adult family homes and memory care communities? In addition to the state inspections, is there anything specific that you rely on, or?
My feet and my eyes and ears. It's constant touring. Part of the law says that we have to be in buildings we refer to at least once a year. So the buildings that the communities that I toured first 7 years ago when I started my business, if I'm referring to them, I always go back in with a new set of eyes for this client, because the last time I went there, it might have been somebody completely different in their care needs. So I try and go back in each time to say, okay, looking through the lens of Mary instead of Stan, is this the right referral? There really isn't, other than the DSHS reports, there isn't an overall list. There is an adult family home association that you can contact. And then for housing referral, senior advisors like me, we have an association. It's the Association of Senior Referral Professionals of Washington. And I would say, wherever possible, use one of the members. It is designed, in fact, on their website, you can also get a 1-sheeter, 2-sheeter, I guess, of the law. So it's a synopsis of the law that pertains to what we do. There are great resources on that website and a list of current members. And we work through best practices. We commit to adhering to the law. To be a member, you have to show that you have your insurance. We're required to carry $1 million in personal and general liability insurance. We have to have a disclosure that matches the law. And so all of those things have to be submitted and be approved for membership, so you can have confidence in the folks that are members of that association. That's
great, because that answers the next question that Patsy had. So
good.
Perfect.
I'm ahead on something. There we go.
Yeah.
There's another comment from Gazelle that I think is important, just really high level. Talk about the long-term care ombudsman program. that kind of, yeah.
So the
Overs-
ombudsman program is one that is they're not a gatekeeper and they're not a moat dragon. They are a kind of the bumper rails for your kids on the bowling alley. They are safeguards. They are designed to be called when you have questions. If you feel that there is not abuse needs to be reported to the police and those authorities. But if someone, say, is being charged for something they shouldn't be, and you can't get that fixed, the ombudsman program is a good one to call. If a home is in disrepair, the DSHS inspector may not be coming out for another 6 months to a year, but there's a broken window in the home where your mom is, and there's cold air coming in, and the house owner isn't doing anything about it. Call the ombudsman. If you're just not sure if they're doing something not quite right, maybe not even illegal, but is this really something they should be doing and caring for your mom? That ombudsman program, they're kind of the first answers. They have so many more answers than I ever can. And they're great resources, and then can point you toward the next step, the next resource, if one needs to come in.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions? Because we're getting close to time, and I just want to respect everybody's time.
Absolutely. As you can tell, I can talk forever. So you just get Adrian, done.
Well, you've made this very easy for me to being the MC for it. So, well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to say thank you very much, Adrian, for all the wonderful information and the great presentation. I'm sure that the two-piece thing, I will get a copy of it. We can put it on in addition to the recording, so people will have that resource, and go from there. Okay.
Wonderful.
Chris, you ought to plug our case review coming up for our
Oh,
for anyone, actually, no longer just professional members.
So this Thursday, I was just going to see if there's any other questions, but yes, so this Thursday we have our case review, which we are opening up to students and also nurses and social workers, just to allow them to kind of give a more broad perspective what patient advocates are and what we do and how we function. That will be this Thursday, and it will be presented by Sarah Jane Yang, and it's going to be more of a financial case review, which after going through it with her is an excellent case that I think everybody needs to understand some of these things. Also, the last thing I was going to plug is that we have our movie coming on the 3rd of June, which is called Angst, which is kind of a 1-hour documentary on anxiety, and it has multiple interviews with children and even Michael Phelps, who had to deal with anxiety through his being a star since age 13 and until captivating the world. So it's a very excellent movie, and we have an excellent panel that will answer questions and kind of give their point on it. So those are the two things that we have at Health Advocate X coming up in the next month, and all that. And unless anybody else has any other questions.
And we have actually, Ashley is going to be stepping out of her full-time role. We have a new operations manager named Chloe, who, if you guys engage with her around membership or other questions that you have, please welcome her. Yeah, there she is. We're very excited to have her. Ashley's mentoring her this month, so.
Well, thank you very much. And once again, thank you very much, Adrian. And
Thank you. Thanks for
Adrian,
having
that
me.
was really great. Yeah.